You know what's cool about today's guest that I'm about to bring you is that one time he was live streaming, and I asked him out of nowhere what the exchange rate was for selling out a deity in terms of the current price of silver, and he answered almost immediately. He has a plan, she has a plan, and you get to pay for it regardless.
The best way to get someone motivated is to stand for something strongly, deeply, passionately.
Subscribe to Disenthrall. Do as you're told.
Greetings, stonk brokers. Welcome back to Disenthrall. I will be Patrick Smith, and before I introduce today's guest, I want to let you guys know about a couple things that we've added to our store. One, we have a shirt that says, having pledged no faith, I break none, and I should have had that pulled up for you, but check our website, disenthrall.me, and you can find, that's funny, Helen, you can find our swag store with the new t-shirts there. And we also have a project coming soon that you should follow our Discord server for. We have a new object that we're selling soon, which is a fake mobile phone for you to keep in your car in states where it's illegal to drive holding a cell phone. For when you get pulled over, you can show them this fake object and say, "Is this what you saw me holding?" And potentially get yourself out of a couple $100 worth of tickets. I will let you know as soon as that product is ready, but definitely get on our Discord server, disenthrall.me/Discord, to join that. Okay, without further ado, today's guest, I have been looking forward to speaking with for like at least a year. I followed him on YouTube for much longer than that. His name is David Stewart. He is a fiction author, a musician, an educator, a screenplay author, a gamer, a commentator, a film, video game, and cultural critic, and a silver bullion hoarder. Please, please welcome to the show, David Stewart. It's great to have you.
Yeah, should have brought some. I have some other cool collectible silver stuff. I have some like little silver bullion things Rolls Royce put out that my dad got years ago. So I still have those sitting around somewhere. Just weird little pieces of silver my dad would pick up, or we'd pick up at a gun show, trade for silver and stuff like that. We ended up with kind of a good little collection, a hoard of random coins. So yeah, I enjoy doing that stuff too.
Yeah, I had a guy donate instead of cash or crypto or whatever. He gave me a silver coin. It's the first and only one that I've owned, but it made me completely rethink money as I sit there and I watch this coin on my shelf appreciate in value instead of my bank account, which we lost 30% of the value of in the last year in fiat. Oh yeah.
So, yeah, that's the great thing about inflation is they can just they tax the money that you already have. So it's like. By stealing the value of the money that's just sitting in the bank. And then of course, yeah, silently. And then of course the reason people want to throw all their money in the stock market is to try to recover some of that precious inflationary. It's like, I got to put it in a market where it can grow just so I'm not losing my money.
Well, I'm not done singing your praises. So when I first found you on YouTube, it was doing movie critiques. I think one of the first movies was one of the newer Star Wars movies. One of the I guess number one, I suppose. Yeah, Force Awakens was the one that kind of blew me up, and then I did a lot of movie critiques, and I kind of decided last year I was going to get out of it because I just had a lot of malaise with it, and just in terms of a business, it's not it's difficult to do. It's difficult to like go to the cinema and see. Of course, that was before we had all the coronavirus stuff, but go to the cinema and see a movie and then come back and review it. And then if it's not something like Star Wars, maybe it doesn't get a lot of views. It's just, so I'm like, I take a step back from that and do other stuff for a bit. And I've enjoyed that as well. I feel like you have to be reinventing yourself pretty often just to, I don't know, enjoy what you're doing creatively. You did a video on that pretty recently, and it was also, you mentioned it in your book, which I want to also talk about, Prolific Creativity. Yes, Prolific Creativity is the name of the book.
Yeah, Keys to Prolific Creativity.
There's a link to all of this in the description, guys. And let me tell you, and I told him this before the show, I have, my routine is that before I interview a guest, because I've interviewed so many people, is the day before I begin building in notes, like show notes of things I want to talk about, things that I find interesting in the person. I think he's holding a record right now for the number of cool things that I have on my notes that I want to talk to him about. So hopefully we'll have time to get to them all, just as a measure of how excited I am to speak with you. So you were doing movie reviews, but not normal movie reviews. You had like a special sort of insight, a special like systematic way that you went about doing it in a more rational sort of I don't know. It was a more substantive method of reviewing them, and I'm sad to hear that you're not doing it anymore.
Yeah, I'm going to try to apply it more to like anime shows. I got to get the weebs to watch the channel, you know. But I made it mostly like I found myself watching a bunch of anime series because I couldn't really leave the house, and I had an exercise. But I don't know, very fortuitously, I tend to do things like right before they become important to do. I bought this exercise bike because I felt like it was going to be hot over summer, and I wanted to do cardio in my house. And then, of course, all the garbage happened and the gyms were closed down. So I just had an old Android tablet. I popped that up on the bike, and just 30 minutes could watch a show and get a little cardio done, get a little exercise done. And I ended up watching a lot of shows. I'm like, I kind of enjoy this. I should talk about it more because I think there's a lot of things that Japanese animators do differently from the West in a lot of good ways, actually. I think Hollywood is in kind of a rut as far as their ability to tell stories in a creative way. They either go full like postmodern tilt where they're actively rebelling against story structure, or they're just going completely save the cat by the book, completely predictable structure.
So you are a prolific author in terms of your output, right? 3-4 books a year? What have you been outputting?
I mean, last year I put out, I don't think I only did like 2 last year, maybe 3. I did this one, which was really interesting to me because I hadn't really written a nonfiction book before, but I thought I'd do one on just work habits. And that's really where I think most artists fail, not because they lack some special talent in writing or they lack some special talent in their art, but because their work habits are not, they haven't established good enough work habits to complete their projects and make progress as an artist and improve over time. They work erratically, or they say, I just don't feel inspired today. And then they kind of fall off from doing the project. So that was what this book was about, is about helping people to put creativity into their life so that it's something habitual, something they can do all the time. And then how to have the right mindset to finish your projects, get them out to people, let people see them, and to build a career that way. So that's really where I wanted to go with that. I did put out at least one other, I don't have it here, Tyrant's Gallow I put out, oh, here it is, last year. I wrote several books, actually, that I didn't put out last year because I felt like the timing was bad at the end of last year. So I did put out Tyrant's Gallow, which is Moonsong Book 2. And Book 3, I was trying to get that edited this month to put out next month. I don't think that's going to happen this month because I just have had a lot of other concerns in my personal life that have just taken a lot of time and energy away from that. And I also wanted to establish a different work habit, which was streaming. I wanted to try just doing some game streaming and see if I could schedule, like hit a consistent schedule. And once I have that figured out, then I could figure out how to put everything else there. So again, it's about establishing work habits. So I wrote several books that I decided not to publish last year because we had all the election fiasco, and then Christmas time right after that. And then January is just a really bad month to release a book. I found I've done books in January before, and they just I don't know what it is. Something about the post-holiday thing. People just aren't in the mood to buy a lot of books and read them.
They're playing with all their Christmas presents. Yeah,
that might be it. It's just not a big month for books.
This is a window that I had minimized from earlier. I'm almost done with your book, actually. The audiobook is available on Audible. I would recommend. It's a really short. It's like 3 hours and 20 minutes long. And he read his own audiobook, which is always cool when an author is able to do that well. And so far, I'm really enjoying it.
I mostly do it to save money. I know,
really?
I'm so bad, but I mostly do it to save money. It's just because I've done the calculations, and like, if I hire somebody to do an audiobook, it's usually a losing proposition for either one of us or both of us. So it's a losing proposition for me to pay them up front because it's so hard to make that money back. And then it's a losing proposition for both of us if we split the royalties, because the voiceover actor is basically working for not what they deserve to work for. Like, they deserve to be paid for their work, and I can't adequately pay them, which means I can pay myself nothing to do it. And I have a background in acting, so it's not like public speaking. So it's not like a zero-sum game where I'm one of those bad authors that can't read their own books. I tend to do a pretty good job with it. You can get the whole Eyes in the Walls audiobook for free on YouTube, by the way. I don't think it's on Audible. Had all kinds of delays with Audible. I need to go check back in with them. Some file had like a mouse click in it or something, and so can't go up with the mouse click. So that one eventually will go up on Audible.
Adam Sikosin says that way you don't have to include a disclaimer. He's referring to I've recorded a lot of audiobooks, and I was recently commissioned to do one that had something in it that was something that I would not want to participate in bringing to the world. It was a bad piece of medical advice, and it sort of crossed the line for me. Like, I never want to be putting out content that somebody might follow and cause harm to somebody. And so
That's interesting.
It was a big, maybe we can talk about that, because when I'm putting out my own content, I have really high standards for the things that I'll talk about and what I will talk. Like, I will never make a medical recommendation to somebody because I'm not a doctor and I'm not an expert in the field.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have a debate where I have people on the show from both sides and moderate that stuff, because that's how we find truth. But when I'm doing an audiobook, it's totally different, because I'm giving voice, I'm performing and doing my best to not only just read the words, but to like communicate them as well as I can, and as what's the word? Just as, and I'm losing words now. See, this is why I don't write my own books. But to perform it as good as possible, so that it impacts people as best as possible. And then I come across a part in a book that is just like crosses a moral line for me. And so I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, I've never considered that.
Like, it's different, because when it's my voice, I can put caveats on things. People know me, my audience knows me. We can have discussions.
Yeah, and I do that. It's like, let me show you this argument. It's not necessarily my argument.
Yeah, but when I'm doing an audiobook, I don't get to do any of that. It's just literally my voice saying words that I morally disagree with. And so that was a rough situation.
I'm trying to think, I've encountered that. I've encountered those things as a musician, where it's like, getting a gig to play for something that you just have a moral objection to. Like, I've got hired to play at like basically an art reveal for just art that I don't politically agree with. And I'm like, am I kind of approving of this art by performing at the unveiling of the art? I came to the conclusion that I really wasn't, and no one would assume that I was. And I think part of that was that I really needed the money at the time. So, but I haven't thought about that as like an audiobook performance. Like, I'm saying things, I'm participating in the creation of something that I think is wrong. And I can imagine that with bad medical advice. I don't know what the bad medical advice might be, and we don't have to get into that. But that's an interesting thing. Like, where does your participation in a project have a moral limit? Because obviously it's not you as a person writing that down. It's not you as a person that has your name on the book as the author, but you are still participating in the dissemination of that information.
Putting my effort and resources behind bad information. Yeah, exactly. I mean, luckily this situation ended beautifully. I contacted the author, showed him why the part was wrong, and he was like, "Oh, just take it out." And I was floored. I was like, it's pretentious of the audiobook performer to like, I don't know, ask for edits on the book, but this guy did, so it ended well. But yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. I don't I never want to assist harm or bad stuff getting out into the world with any of my resources, even if it's just my body and my voice. But also it's compounded on the fact that I have a YouTube channel where I talk to people about moral philosophy quite often. And so when they hear that Patrick Smith is doing the audio thing for a book, they might take that as more of an endorsement, because like normally if you're listening to an audiobook, you don't, and it says something you disagree with, you don't go and look up who did the audio performance of the book to, bitch at them on Twitter. You look up the author of the book, right? So yeah, it was interesting, but it turned out well. I would love it, and if you don't want to talk about the movie critiques anymore because you're kind of over it, that's fine. But I would love if you could like break down.
Yeah, we totally can.
Cool. Give me like the summary of the categories you use for critiquing a movie.
This
any
is
art,
basically,
right?
This is really from my experience as a teacher. Of course, I taught at the college level. I taught public school, taught private school, and rubrics for grading are really helpful because they break down what a student did, according to maybe what was in the assignment, but it really helps to categorize what they did so that they can understand where they succeeded and where they failed, rather than just putting like a blanket grade on something like you get a B. That doesn't help anything. So most movie critiques I noticed really just focused on the like letter grade at the end. They're like, I felt this way about it, F. And so I looked at it, I'm like, is this movie really an F? Let's look at what they did right and what they did wrong. And I basically came up with a system that I thought broke down the contributions to the total product of the movie so that you could evaluate what things did right and what things did wrong. And most people, who even don't like the system, they're like, well, I understand the conclusion you came to, though, and I actually agree with it. So, I think I gave the newest Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker, it ended up being a D-. It got a 60 out of 100. And people are like, how is it a 6 out of 10? I'm like, that's a D-. The other ones were Fs. It was slightly better, so it got D-. It's like, that's a barely passing grade because it was entertaining enough. And all the other things were in line. Like, the production was good enough. The sound was good enough. The special effects were good, right? Cinematography's good. The use of aesthetics was generally good. The acting wasn't terrible, but the script was pretty bad. So like all the bad parts can't completely negate things that you do well, in my opinion. So I usually have a production category that's 1/3 of the score. Then I have a story category that I usually break down into like different categories, like setting, characters, and plot, how it executes those things. And then what I call a general effect, which is how it came across, how it actually worked as a total product. So a lot of people just kind of look at the general effect and they're like, I didn't like it, F. And that's as far as they really think about it. And they're like, here's all these things I didn't like about it, without really thinking about things that may have worked. So if you look at a movie like The Last Jedi, which is very unpopular with Star Wars fans for very good reasons, because of the way it treats characters, people had a really significant negative emotional impact of it. It might have been like an F in terms of general effect, but it in other ways was like a B+ in production. The sound was good. The aesthetic treatment was generally good, even though it wasn't that original, because he was basically just kind of copying, what Lucas did, not even recently, but in the distant past, but all that stuff was generally done well, and it even wasn't even poorly directed. Like, it was well acted. It just wasn't written as a cohesive, good story, and certainly not as a good Star Wars story. So sometimes I joke to people like, oh, which of the, I haven't seen any of the new Disney movies. I'm like, just watch The Last Jedi, and that's the only one you should watch. It's like, is it good? I'm like, oh, it's terrible. But it's like a Star Wars nightmare. And so it leaves you with this weird sense when you're done. You're like, what did I just watch? And it's like, it's like some kind of bizarre fan movie, but the fan hated, it's like a fan movie by a fan who hates Star Wars. Or like he loved Star Wars. I wrote the story in my mind. It's like he loved Star Wars so much, and he grew up with Star Wars, and then he met George Lucas, and the first thing George Lucas did was like grab his crotch and molest him, and then said, "Now you get to make a movie." And so he made The Last Jedi. It's like Luke's a loser who hates everyone, and
Yep.
The good guys are the bad guys, and I don't like this bad guy, so I'm just going to chop him in half.
The headline of one of the particular reviews just spoke directly to my soul after I got home from the theater and I watched a review. It was like, this movie is a hate letter to the fans
Yeah,
of Star
it's a hate
Wars.
letter.
And I was like,
that's what I felt like.
Oh, that's it. That's it. Oh.
Like everything about it is like, oh, you like this? Well, I hate that, and I'm gonna now that I get to make a Star Wars movie, I get to show you how stupid it is. You know? So if you watch it from that perspective, it's a rather interesting movie to watch. It's like somebody's trapped into it's like somebody who hates Star Wars is trapped in it. That's what I feel like when I watch the movie. It's like somebody, it's isekai. It's like, oh, Star Wars isekai. It's like, but you hate Star Wars. That's the movie. It's like, oh, wouldn't you like to get isekai'd into Middle Earth? It's like, but I hate Lord of the Rings, and that's the movie they made.
One of the important things that in your critique style is that you explain that like a 0 rating would be basically impossible to achieve, as would like a 10, be like, right? A 10 would be, it's perfect. Perfect is very difficult. It's not completely impossible. Like there are things that I've listened to in terms of like music and that I'm like, this part of it is a 10. Like this is the best. This is categorically of the highest level possible for someone to do. Like this is the highest level of music performance you can do. This is the highest level of production or composition. This is the highest level of movie composition. 0 would be, it's literally absent. So the example I usually give for 0 is there was a movie, there's actually 2 movies called Blue. One called Blue movie by, oh my gosh, who am I thinking of? He did the soup cans and everything. The pop artist from the 60s. His name's on the tip of He did this semi-pornographic movie called Blue Movie in the 60s, Andy Warhol. And there's no story. He just filmed 2 actors talking and having sex with terrible production, right? So it's one of these movies where people talk about it like, I'm like, the Emperor has no clothes, but mostly there's no story. So the story is 0 because there's no story. There's nothing there. Or it'd be like a 1. I guess the story, it just emerges from 2 people talking about nothing. So that's an example of a 1. There's another movie called Blue that was put out by a filmmaker while he was dying of AIDS. And it's a sad story, but the movie is literally the visuals are just a blue screen the whole time. But that's not a movie. As much as people might be emotionally affected by some message with the blue screen, it's 0 because that's not visual information. That's it. You put out an audiobook with a blue screen. Maybe that has some kind of artistic impact, but in terms of production, that's a 0. No, there's no visuals. There's like going to a movie and there's no movie on the screen. That's a 0. And what would perfection be? You have an example handy of perfection? Because it would be category by category, right? It would be like, the sound design is perfect, or, the script writing is perfect, or. I mean, as close a movie as I can think of that's like as close to a perfectly executed movie would probably be like Michael Mann's Heat. Michael Mann's Heat nails every aspect of what it is trying to do. And I can't think of any way that it could have been better. I can't think of a single category a single thing about the movie it could have done better than what it did. It's Michael Mann's best movie. It's like his masterpiece. And oddly, this is an interesting thing about iteration. It's the second time he made that movie. Because he originally made a TV movie that was the same movie. I think it was called, I'm trying to remember what it was called. But he basically remade that into a feature-length movie with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Val Kilmer. Basically a whole giant cast of top-notch actors who fit exactly whatever role they were in. And every piece of dialogue is well delivered. Everything about it is really good. And the cinematography is just awesome. It's just one of the best photographed movies in the 90s. It's just a great movie all around, and it has a great story and great messaging behind it about, you have this main character who says, if you want to make moves on the street, you have no connections, have nothing you can walk out. You can't walk out on in 5 minutes flat when you feel the heat around the corner. And he basically ends up failing his own philosophy because he can't walk away from revenge at the end of the movie, and it kills him. And his friend can't really walk away from his wife until she gives him the signal that he needs to walk away, and then he walks away from her and he survives. So it's like this deep theme about, the intense risk that they're involved with and how it excites them.
and how at the same time, if they're not really living that philosophy properly, then it comes back and bites them in the ass, and it ultimately leads to one of the characters' deaths. And it has a great ending. The ending is absent dialogue. There's a shootout at the end, and Robert De Niro is killed by Al Pacino, and it's killed in this one spot. I used to live by LAX, so I know exactly where this movie was filmed and exactly what it's like to stand in that part of the freeway. There's this part when the planes land, all the lights come up and it's completely blinding. And you can stand there and watch that happen. There's like park benches to watch it. There's another one, same place, a very similar thing in Las Vegas too. If you ever go to Las Vegas, you can go down, I think it's Paradise, next to the airport. There's a bunch of places where you can just sit on a bench and watch the planes land at night. And it's really cool, actually, because you can see the lights flare up, and it's neat. So there's no dialogue at the end. He shoots him, and then they just like hold hands, and that's the end of the movie, because there's like an acknowledgement of like the other person's humanity, the other person as an opponent, even though they lost. It's like them shaking hands after the match. So it's got a great ending, and they don't hammer you over the head with anything. They let you stop and just think about what's there. Pretty much nails every aspect. Wow. And it is one of my favorite movies. And I think it's one of my favorite movies, not because it has some particular resonance with the themes with me, because, I have a lot of attachments in my life, and I'm also not a criminal, but because it's just so well executed.
Interesting. There's something that I've, just to continue talking about your movie reviews, you did, I think you talked about it once in one of your reviews, and then you did a separate exclusive video on the topic, but it was something along the lines of the thing that has prevented Hollywood from being able to write good movies anymore is the sort of postmodernistic moral relativism. And they don't have a strong acquaintance with good and evil, and so that affects their ability to craft characters that may be good or evil. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. Since they don't really believe in a moral standard, that there's a moral standard that exists that they ought to adhere to. And this is, of course, when our societies become more secular and less religious, it's not just absence of Christianity. These moral things are exist in every society on some level. But when the basis of that morality gets pulled back, what's left, for them, it's kind of a nihilism. So when they make movies that are about moral conflict, it's kind of manneristic. They're copying, they're imitating the people who came before them, who actually made movies and thought about these things and made stories that had to do with the moral questions and what good and evil are. Because they don't have that, they really can't communicate stories about good and evil. The most that they can do is try to make a story where everybody is either a Machiavellian or a false Machiavellian. Like they're pretending to be good, but they're really just will to power, And I say Machiavellian, I have a lot of respect for Machiavelli, and I think everybody should read Machiavelli because it's really informative for politics and life in general. But I'm not a nihilist in thinking that there's like no morality that binds anyone, but that's kind of how they operate with their stories. So they ring hollow when they try to make stories about good and evil. Everything kind of rings hollow because they don't really believe it, and they haven't really made the story correctly for that. And then when the story is about how there really is no good and evil, it's just depressing at the end of that. You just kind of get to the end, you're like, okay, great. Another story about how everybody's bad.
Everybody sucks. I hate all these people. Yeah, that's such a deflating feeling in any kind of story, for real. And when you go ahead.
I get kind of exhausted with that with some of the more recent TV series like House of Cards with Kevin Spacey. I watched it with my wife and it was very well made, but about 3 or 4 episodes in, I just realized that there was nobody to like. Everybody who you thought might be some redeemable person, oh, here's this naive person, they just get kind of perverted and turned into another, nihilist. And so it just becomes exhausting to watch it. And so you just stop watching it.
How do you think that relates or affects or represents Game of Thrones?
So Game of Thrones, I didn't watch the whole series. I watched the first couple episodes, and I just didn't really like the way they were made. They were too slow for me. I read the first book a long time ago, and I think it's very well written. I think it's a very well done book. It's full of lots of surprises, and the characters really pop, and you care about the characters. But the problem is you have that twist ending where who is it who gets killed? Is it Ned who gets killed? Anyway, you have this character that you're rooting for the whole time basically get
Ned
killed
Stark.
at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's this it's this big twist at the end, and it definitely works in terms of the writing. But once I got past that point, I didn't really want to read another book, and it's not like I felt angry at George R.R. Martin for killing a character. It's like, no, that was probably a really badass ending. But I just didn't have any care for what was going to happen after that.
I know. I have never read the books, but when I was watching the series, I got to the end of the first season. They killed Ned, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm done here. I don't give a shit about any of these other people. They're all bad people. Why do I care? And I think it was like 3 years before I even picked it up again to watch the second season a little bit. It was just there's really no one I rooted for. Yeah, and the book, it's like, oh, you got to read the second one. There's all these cool things happen. It's like, yeah, but I don't really care. That's what ended up happening. It's like, well, Arc 5 says, why do I care about these people? The 7 words that kill a story. Yeah, for real.
Yeah, and I actually have encountered that even with very good writers like Brandon Sanderson. By the time I got to the third Stormlight Archive book, I was like halfway through it, and I'm like, I really don't care what happens to any of these people at this point. I don't know how I ended up in that position, but like slowly the good qualities of the characters start to get undermined. And sometimes I think writers try to write like, flawed or complex characters, and you end up maybe going overboard, or you don't give them enough things that we care about. We want to see them succeed. And then eventually, if the reader doesn't care about them succeeding, it's like kind of like, I guess we're closing the book because I don't really care whether these characters live or die. The third Stormlight Archive book got to be a real slog to read through, because at that point the plot was moving so slow and the characters had become so annoying at times. You just didn't want to turn the page. You're like, I wonder what's gonna. You're not like, I wonder what's gonna happen next. It's like, I wonder if anything's gonna happen next. Flipping through the pages.
Yeah, I started reading like one sentence a paragraph. Yeah, I look for like 8. I'm like, let me just see. Is there anything happening soon? Yeah, that's the end of a book for sure. How does this affect your writing? Like, do you think about this when you're crafting characters? How to not sort of let nihilism creep in, or is that not even a problem for you? Like, how does that work when you're crafting characters?
I don't feel like it's a problem for me, because I don't know. I guess I start from a more moral perspective. But I think about, everybody's motivated by different things. And I feel like compelling characters are motivated by big causes. And so I wrote a book called Needle Ash a while back, and people really like that one. So you can read it. It's medieval fantasy. And if you like, say, medieval military fantasy, then you'll probably really like this one. Well, the two main characters are basically motivated by causes that are bigger than themselves. And the villain is motivated by that, but we don't really know what it's about till we get a hint of it at the end. But he's doing we don't even really know he's the villain until a certain way into the book anyway. So I like it when characters are motivated by things that are important to them, and things that are a little bit bigger than, I want some coffee right now. So I haven't really written stories that say focus on something like addiction, unless I was going to write, and I probably wouldn't unless I was going to write about an addict recovering, because I think that could be a very interesting story, because that's the addict being motivated by something other than his immediate needs and thinking really beyond today. So that's what I think makes a character really compelling. The reason people like Luke Skywalker is he really cares. He really cares about his friends. He cares about the galaxy. He cares about the rebellion. He really cares about things. That's why The Last Jedi was such a bizarre thing to see him not care anymore. That doesn't make a character that we root for. We want characters that really care about things happening. They really care about how things are going to come out.
Yeah. You made a video that basically said, look, this is sort of just fan fiction. Like, and you even like delineated what makes something authentic or canon by basically saying like like, I think you used the analogy of a music band where, like, let's say you have 4 members of the band, and one day half of them get replaced. You know, either one quits or some of them dies and they get replaced. Is that still the original band? Is that still like authentic canon music when they start creating new stuff? It was a fascinating video.
And I thought about it. I thought about it with the Misfits. I think the Misfits are a really interesting example because you had this original band that was basically formed by Glenn Danzig and Jerry Only. Well, when Glenn Danzig quit the band, does that mean Jerry Only gets to keep having the band? Well, the thing is, Glenn wrote all the songs. So Jerry can manage to continue the band somehow, writing the songs. Well, that's really a different band. And I like 90s Misfits. I like newer Misfits just fine. I think it's good music. But it's basically using a name that's not quite appropriate. Really, the Misfits should be Glenn and Jerry, not just Jerry writing music that Glenn has nothing to do with. So it's kind of a weird thing. Also, Abath and Immortal. You have Abath, who has played all of the instruments at various times. I think there's even an Immortal album where he just plays every instrument. So it's just him on the album. Can you have Immortal without him in the band, considering he's the only member who'd been in the band the entire time? I don't really think he can.
Or if you, in relation to Star Wars, go ahead.
Yeah, or I'll use one more music analogy. It's like, imagine you have a band like Metallica sell the rights to be called Metallica. That's kind of what we did with Star Wars.
Yep.
If you came on stage and like, these 4 people aren't Metallica, it's like, but they bought the right to be called Metallica, therefore they are. That's where people call it a skin suit. Or it's like you put on the other person's skin and demand that people acknowledge you as
it's
real.
like a mouse skin suit over Star Wars. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So how you seem to have some moral framework that you abide by. What would you say your framework is? How do you identify politically?
So politically,
or
classically, I'm a libertarian. But I've kind of gotten away from that label because I feel like libertarianism as a movement is too schizophrenic right now. I tend to use the word optimate, which is just a different word from conservatism, because same problem with conservatism. Conservatives have conserved nothing. They haven't conserved anything about the culture, or they've conserved nothing. They couldn't even conserve the women's bathroom, right? So they've conserved nothing. So why would I call myself a conservative? In the sense that I'm I guess a traditionalist. If we wanted to get down to what I really believe politically, I guess I'd call myself like a localist, or, Nassim Taleb calls himself a fractal localist. And that's pretty close to what I believe, which is that most let's say call it coercive power should be localized. And then it should get less and less the further away you get from yourself. Well, obviously you have total coercive power over yourself because you own yourself and you control yourself, and you can make your arms move any way that you want. And then from there, there's less obligation. You have the first obligation to yourself and then your family. Your family can impose obligations upon you. And as you get further and further away, there's less and less obligation and should be less and less control. So, I'd say classically I'm a libertarian. Morally, I'm a Christian. I was raised as a Mennonite, so people know about that. Nowadays, I would not consider myself that, but I am definitely still a Christian. I'm a believer in Christ, and that colors my moral framework very sharply, because there are obviously rules that go along with that and moral directives that go along with that, going all the way back to the Old Testament. But really, I'd say most of our moral Christian framework really comes down from like Thomism and a lot of medieval philosophy regarding what is virtue and what kind of things should you actually not do, getting down into the specifics. So that's where I am morally. I know that's a lot of stuff to throw out there, but
no, it's great. Well, we can talk about it if you want. When does the sort of coercive justification of the government stop for you? At what size? Does it grow too large to be justified?
Well, I'd say as soon as the person doing the coercion doesn't have any feedback from the person they're coercing or the locality that they're coercing, that's when the power becomes completely illegitimate. So if you think about local police I'm really a minarchist, so local police are the great kind of divide between minarchism and full anarchy, right? So if you think about local police, I live in a small town. We have a small police force here, and the police live in town. So I enjoy, one of the things I've talked about on stream is that my town, all the restaurants are open and all the gyms are open, even though in California, it's illegal for them to be open. The question is, who's enforcing that law? Well, the police ought to enforce it, but they don't enforce it because those are their neighbors and they don't agree with the law coming down from above. So the most immediate thing is a feedback. I don't want my neighbors to hate me. I'm not gonna come in and shut down the restaurant or threaten to arrest them because they're serving people food. People are generally, even within that, people generally have basic precautions for whatever they're going to do. They wash hands or they wear masks if they're in tight little groups. But yeah, our restaurants are open. And that brings people from other towns in. So our restaurants have had kind of a little boom lately where we can't even get a seat at a restaurant on Friday night because they're open. It's a demand and supply.
You're in Texas, right?
No, I'm in California.
Oh, you're in California right now. I thought you were in Texas. Is that on your website? Were you in Texas at one point?
I'm born in Texas. So I'm originally from Texas.
That's what.
But I live in California right now with my family. But the town that I live in is a little rural town, and it's called Oakdale, and it's like the most cowboy city in America is their thing. We have rodeos here, and it's kind of like little Texas in that sense. Everyone in my immediate neighborhood I shouldn't say everyone. There's like my next door neighbor. He's really rinsed the property, so he voted for Biden. But everybody's kind of right wingy, and we got a lot of gun nuts. We have a lot of police that live around California? Here, a lot of highway patrol.
How do you have gun nuts in California? How does that work?
They all live by me.
So it's like the Austin of Texas, but inverted.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where knowing real law enforcement, having them as my friends and neighbors, that line between kind of minarchy and anarchy, where you're relying on, the government to enforce something, if it's completely localized, there's a lot of feedback as far as unjust laws. The cops are not really going to crack down on their neighbors unless it's a problem that's affecting other people. So yeah, the police are going to stop you from defacing someone's property, or they'll come talk to you if your party's too loud or something like that. They're probably not going to haul you away or anything, because again, the point is to resolve the conflict, usually not to lock people up.
Yeah, it breaks down pretty quick in larger cities, though. Like you stack enough people
because
together.
Nobody knows each other. Right. Absolutely, you're correct. So I'm looking at a microcosm of things that I like, and there's bad sides there's good and bad. There's no nirvana in this world. There's always going to be some positive and some negative with every situation. You get to cities, and I used to live in LA. Nobody knows anybody else. That's the big problem. There's no common ground. Maybe you live in an apartment and you don't know your neighbor. Maybe you've never even talked to your neighbor, and he's from somewhere else, and maybe he doesn't even speak English. Maybe you guys don't speak the same language. How could you come to a common agreement about what kind of behaviors you both want to engage in? I'm big into negotiating standards between individuals. And that's how I think things happen locally, is people sort of figure out what kind of things their neighbors are okay with them doing and what kind of things they're okay with their neighbors doing. And all of that happens without any kind of enforcement, like use of force of any kind. In a city, how can you have that? My neighbor's being really loud. I can't even tell him to be quiet because I don't even speak the same language. So people get trained. And in California, I feel like it's really bad because, I don't know, our culture is very averse to I wouldn't even call it direct conflict, because if you go to Texas, people are just a little bit more, they're just much more willing to talk to you about anything. If you don't like something your neighbor's doing, you'll go over and tell him, and usually he's really reasonable because everybody's I don't know. There's like a neighborly feeling to that. People are much more open with each other.
There's an
in
anecdote
California, no one talks to their neighbors. It's bizarre.
There's an anecdote I used to describe the exact difference that I think you're talking about. There was a New Yorker friend that saw this happen. We were at a computer store. It's called Fry's Electronics. I think you have those in California.
Yeah, we have. I love Fry's.
And we came out of Fry's, and there was this couple. It was a man and his wife, and they had bought a big screen TV that would not fit in their car. And my wife and I just kind of walked over and were like, hey, do you guys need help getting the TV to your house? Just, throw it in the back of my truck, and we'll drive it over to your place. And, no big deal. I'm happy to help. You guys are stuck. And he was like, really? You do that? And I was like, yeah, dude, don't worry about it. How much money do you want? No, don't worry about it. No money. And I think the guy was from New York or something like that. So he was super distrustful. Like, he basically thought I was going to run off with his TV or something. But I think that illustrates the sort of the difference, is that there's kind of like a common decency and kindness and mutual respect that still exists here that's been eradicated just by I don't think there's anything special in the water in Texas. I think it's just like you stack enough people on top of each other, eventually.
Yeah, I don't think we're meant to be in such close proximity.
Right.
Like, I think cities are unnatural, and I hate to do like the appeal to the natural, but it doesn't feel right when you have a bunch of people that close together. And I think it compounds in a place like LA, where it's like everybody's from somewhere else. So nobody knows each other. Nobody trusts each other. I think this is another thing too, that still exists in Texas. I don't know, where are you at? Are you in Texas?
Yeah, I'm in Dallas. Yep.
Okay, great. I have a lot of family in Dallas. So, but I think it still exists in Texas, where there's a common, everybody kind of grows up. You could be, I'm from Lufkin originally, but like, I might be from Lufkin and someone else might be from Tyler, but we can quickly strike up a conversation about football practices we might have experienced in high school, because everybody did that.
Yep.
So even though we're from different places, we have experiences that are so similar. They're basically like common experiences, which can create a quick bond. You notice how quickly people in the Army who've never met each other become friends.
Mm.
I was in this unit, you were in that unit, and then boom, they're like instant friends, because they have so much common background that they can very quickly make a personal bond and start trusting each other. Mm-hmm. Get to some of these cities and there's none of that. This person is from Seattle. This person's from Mexico City. Their schooling is completely different. Maybe they both speak the same language, but that's kind of where it ends. They can communicate about who needs to hold the door open, but it doesn't really get much further than that. So your trust is built around common experiences. I think that's also where like a more authentic love comes from for anybody that's young. And it's like, how do I know if I love this person? It's like you spend time with them and have a lot of shared experiences, and love develops out of that. That's where that trust and mutual caring actually comes from, is from those common experiences. As our society starts to lose that, I think that's where you get the encroachment of the state. People start to look to the state to solve a problem that it's not meant to solve. So I call up my neighbors to like, because they are, I call the cops because my neighbors are being too loud. You're asking the state to fix your interpersonal problem,
right?
Which it should do. Like, the police resources should be used to actually catch thieves and murderers, right? In fact, we don't really need a lot of police if they're just doing actual police work. If they're actually policing things that maybe you and I would agree are actual crimes, of property crimes and violent crimes, you don't really need quite as much police presence as you end up having. So you look for the state to do that. And then I think it goes out from there. So you're completely isolated and alone, and an atomized individual in a city, and something bad happens, you lose your job. No one's there to help you, right? No one's there to, you know what, man, I'll cover your rent this month while you're looking for a job. Or it's like, no, I have to go to the state and get welfare because I lost my job, or all these other bad things, misfortunate things that happen to people. It's the state that has to solve it, because they don't have any friends or family that have any connections with them that are willing to be charitable towards them for even a moment.
There's no there's no social leverage to sort of maintain behavioral standards either. The closer you pack people, the more strangers that they become from one another.
It's a weird thing. I think people need their own space. I think you need your own private space in order to have a place where you can reach out to other people.
Yeah, and maybe the reason why Texas hasn't sort of regressed in that way as much as others is because even though it's a big city, it's a very spread out city. It's a very large metroplex. People still have, quarter-acre plots of land in the city, and that gives you more breathing room to sort of be yourself. But that's changing because, man, everyone is moving here right now. I'm not looking forward to where this is going.
It's like that Stone Toss comment where it's like, "Don't shoot, don't shoot. We're from America." It's like, "Oh, you are? I thought you were Mexicans for a second there." Yeah, we're from California.
That sentiment is real here. I mean, you have family, or you have family and friends here. You know very much how.
Yeah, if I go back to and my wife and I have talked about moving back to Texas because at a certain point, you have to kind of know when to fold them, when to hold them, as far as where you're living and what kind of conditions you're living under, as far as state authority goes. And I have a lot of family in Texas, so I already have built-in connections there. But it's like, come back. Where are you guys from? We're from California. Oh, no, we're like the good ones. We're like good guys. I got guns and stuff. Let's talk about it.
You say something like, you know how Austin is the California of Texas? Well, I'm from the Texas of California. Be nice to me.
I'm from the Texas of California.
Be nice to me. Yeah. Well, cool. I hope you move here. That would be awesome. I didn't bring you here to grill you on your politics. That's my focus in life.
That's fine. I like talking about politics. The problem is maybe I'd be more successful if I shut up about politics a little bit more, but I don't know. I just can't shut up. I have to be honest all the time.
I mean, you are relentlessly rational on your channel, and I very much enjoyed watching all of your commentary over the years. And you're I'm just gonna keep bragging about you the entire time until everyone on my channel subscribes to yours. But it's always a pleasure. All of your takes, and one of the takes that you came out with recently that is really speaking to a contemporary situation going on is your video on game theory and rules of your video was on sports and combat sports and any kind of competitions regarding how rules work versus how people think they work. The published rules of a game might not actually be the rules that are in play for a game. I don't want you to re-perform the whole video. I put a link to it in the description. Everyone here should go watch that video. But if you could give us the summary of that, and then I want to move us into game stonks and how that interrelates. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, totally. Okay, because I would love to talk about this because it's been on my mind so much. Well, the inspiration really comes from some of the things I realized because I like to play a lot of RPGs, and this is something you figure out real quick with RPG gamers is that they very quickly will figure out how to exploit the system to maximize what's possible. Yes. And good designers will design around that. So some people will pick up, say, Final Fantasy IV, and they get late in the game. They're like, I'm just getting stomped. It's like, well, you need to figure out how to play the game and level up this way. It's like, but they didn't tell me how to do that. It's like, this is made for Japanese gamers who just did that, who just figured that out.
That's a difference in new games. Games that have come out over the past 15 years, they hold your hand from beginning until the game is over. Games from when I was a kid, they would beat your ass until you gave up or until you figured it out.
Yeah. So RPG gamers are really good at figuring out what the rule sets actually are. And I made these very popular videos. They're still very popular. Some of my most popular content on Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, how to level in it, how the leveling system works and how to exploit it. So the first one I made was efficient leveling, how to exploit the leveling system to make your character uber powerful so that you could say, kill all the guards in the city without and never die, things like that. And people were like, this is so complicated. How did you figure this out? And it's like, it wasn't just me. A bunch of us figured it out when the game came out. And then you figured out how to exploit it. And I realized that all games basically work that way. And the thesis is that in any game where there are winners and losers, gameplay always takes place, or I should say almost always, because some gameplay won't, but it usually takes place at the limits of what's possible. So the limits of what's possible might be your physiological limits, like you can only run so fast, you can only throw a ball so far physically, you have a physical limit. And then there's the rules, which are artificial limits. Those are the limits that are imposed by the nature of the game. It's how you're playing football, not basketball, is that, you can't dribble in football, for instance. But in football, think about how, let's say, man, we're gonna throw a touch. Think about that instant replay. Why do we have instant replay? It's because the players are always playing at the edge of the rules. They catch the ball, they drag the foot across, and then they get the ball like across the end zone to score a touchdown. Did the tip of the ball go across the beginning of the line to have a touchdown? Think about how often that happens. Why does that happen? Well, they're such high-skilled players that the play always takes place at the limits. In order for you to be a successful receiver, that cornerback, or to be a good cornerback, the safety or whoever who's covering you is so good. The only way that you're going to be able to get past them is by playing at the very limits of your physical capacity and the limits of the rules. Catching the ball way over your head and dragging your feet as you fall out of bounds. That only really happens in the NFL. You're not going to see it in high school play because the players aren't that skilled. They're not at the limits yet. So whenever there's winners and losers, you're going to play at the limits of what's possible. But it goes out of life. Now, I mentioned election, but if you talk too much about the election on YouTube, they're like, very naughty boy. Naughty boy. But the rules of the game for the election were, there's these ways that votes can be submitted. Mm-hmm. I'm using passive voice there. Take note. But there are ways that votes can be submitted. Now, if you're in control of the government, you can say, well, I might like to change those rules for how votes can be submitted in a way that will favor my side versus the other side. And that's really what I'm talking about with the gameplay in, say, the election, is that you set it up so that one side can play at the practical limits and the other one is not, or set it up with the rule set that favors one side over the other. Then you end up with the outcome that you end up with that. So it's the same thing with, it's basically with politics. You're always playing at the limits of what's possible. You're going to raise as much money as possible in the ways that you're allowed to. You're going to spend it in what ways you can spend it. You're going to toe the line for what you can and can't say. Notice as soon as Donald Trump was not president, they banned him off Twitter because they felt like they could finally get away with it. Because their own rule set, when they said that he was as president, he couldn't block people because he was providing like a public information service. Mm-hmm. But that kind of came back and bit him in the ass because they couldn't even wait for him to leave office. They're like, okay, we're just going to ban him now.
Yep.
Because they set up a little rule that allowed him to not block people, but they kind of bit him on the ass. And like, we actually can't ban him now because it's a public information service, without us maybe having to deal with someone trying to enforce a rule on us. So all that stuff exists in life, too. You're always going to play at the limits of what's possible. You might notice this in your job or something like that. If people are going up for a promotion, people might play dirty, or they'll do things that are a little bit outside of maybe good behavior because it's maybe slightly allowed in the rules. And in sports, I use steroids as an example. People love the idea of, for whatever reason, they like the idea of freaks that are freaks without drugs for some reason. Like, I'm not sure what it is. They're like, I want Barry Bonds to hit 900 home runs, but have never taken a drop of performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah.
He's just that genetically gifted, or he's that hardworking. And it's like, well, I don't know why you like genetic gifts so much better than pharmaceutical gifts, but okay. Let's be realistic, though. Is Barry Bonds the only one using steroids? No. All of them are going to be using them to the maximum amount because there's winners and losers. And if you're not using them, Barry Bonds, who didn't use steroids, could lean up against there's a little place in Giant Stadium where people walking by the pier who are, we call it it's like they can walk up and press their face against the fence and see into the game. They built it there. And there's like a little guard there who'll only let you watch like 15 or 20 minutes of the game at a time so that other people can come by and watch the game. Barry Bonds would be pressed up against that chain link fence wondering, I wonder why these guys are so good at baseball. If he had never bothered to take any performance enhancing drugs. I guess God just didn't give me the gift of being great at baseball. Well, God gave you the gift, and Pfizer also gave you the gift.
So
you got to do both to compete. That's the reality.
The thread that I think runs through this modern stock market game stonk controversy is the thing that you said about bodybuilders and steroids was that if you're competing in a sport, not even bodybuilders, if you're competing in a sport that requires, physical attributes and steroids are not banned, then steroids are allowed. It's going to be part of the rules. So if something, and not only banned in the rules, but actually enforced, like you can have a rule against it, but if you don't enforce it, then it doesn't exist. Yeah. Right. So
like a lot of these bodybuilding federations, it's like, we're a drug-free sport. No, the performance-enhancing drugs are not allowed. It's like, where's the drug test? They don't drug test. So they are allowed. That's a PR thing. It's so that kids can look at the bodybuilders and they're not basically getting a message that's like, hey, you want to be super jacked and ripped like that guy? Better get some tren. It's like, oh, well, these guys just work out really hard. They really don't. And honestly, I kind of support, as dual-faced as it is and kind of dishonest, I understand it. I'm not going to say I support it, but I understand it because you really don't want to send a message to fans that aren't deep enough in the lifestyle or the sport to know the massive amount of performance-enhancing drugs that are used in bodybuilding. You want people to feel like they can go to the gym and work out, and like that's a good thing. That is good for them. And you just don't want people to immediately think that what they need to do is go find a drug dealer to get a line on a bunch of performance-enhancing drugs so they can get super jacked like Mr. Olympia or something like that. You really don't want people to jump on that first thing. So I guess I understand that perspective a little bit.
Yeah, I missed a couple super chats here. Jim Jesus said, thanks for the $2. He said, yeah, but how will any of this make Circus a brothel and dispensary? Sorry, I guess I missed the context on that one. Then recently he said, I invested in GameStonk and all I got was a $3 store credit. So here's the through line. The through line to the GameStonk situation, the Reddit controversy that everyone is talking about right now, almost like they want to distract you from talking about other things, as the media always does, is there's a lot of good videos out talking about what short selling is. So if anybody in the audience doesn't know what a short stock sale is, type 1 in the chat and I will quickly walk you through a high level view of what short selling is. But it's basically a way, the super short version is it's a way to profit off a stock going down in value or going down in price as opposed to up. Arc5 put a 3 in chat, so that means he is an expert at short selling. Mutant Banhammer put a 2 in there. You can tell this is an anarchistic channel because no one does anything I say, and I love it that way.
I'll interject an example. An anarchistic example of rule enforcement is video game speedrunning, where it's just a community of people, and there's no leader. There's no one who says these are the way it is. It's like people know the rules to get on the board, and if the community feels like you broke that rule,
not only
it's just kind of a collective action. There's no king who decides it.
The creator of the board is also just a guy. He's like, I'm going to run the game in this way, according to these rules, and get the best time I can. And if you care about my idea of a good speedrun rule set for this game, then you can compete with me. And if you don't care, make your own rule set and compete. It's perfect. It's a great example. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's great. It's completely anarchistic and highly ordered. So a lot of people think anarchy means disorder. That's not it. In fact, most order is, I guess, collective and spontaneous rather than like top down, And so I think video game speedrun is a great example of how you can have rules without, some authority declaring themselves the authority and then having rules that they attempt to enforce, maybe improperly. So anyway, so they have short selling stocks.
I was going to go back to, you seem to be quite familiar with anarchy. I'm curious, what's your holdup? Why would you consider yourself more of a minarchist than an anarchist?
I just think, it's because I think if you extend it enough, again, we talked about this a little bit off stream, but sometimes you have to ask the question of what is the state? So if you have like a rule enforcement agency, that's a state. If you have a patriarchal family where the patriarchs are running around enforcing rules on people, you basically have a state, but it's not like the state that we would recognize. So it's one of those things where it really just depends how deep you want to go on what it means to have a state, or what it means to have rulers and what rulers are, or whether, and again, I noticed that a lot of libertarians like myself are very individualistic, but the reality is you need a lot of you need some collectivization for actual order to happen. People have to work as a group. And so if you have a good ordered group, there are social consequences without any need of the state. In fact, I'd say most people's interactions on a day-to-day basis are completely anarchistic. There's no state involved in vast majority of things you're doing, other than it like pilfering money with sales tax and things like that. So like, you buy something from the shopkeeper, the state's only involved in stealing 10% of it in a sales tax arrangement. It's not involved in anything that you decide to do with the shopkeeper at all. It's completely anarchistic. You guys are on normal ground with each other. He wants to sell something, you want to buy it. You understand that stealing's wrong, and if you try to steal, he'll stop you. All that stuff's kind of in the background layer without any authority coming in and being like, this is the way it must be done.
Oh, we got a 1 in chat. Okay, so 10,000 foot view on short selling. So you want to profit off of a stock going down in price. You borrow the stock from a broker. So a broker owns the stock, you borrow it from the broker, and so you have the stock and you also have a debt to the broker for the one stock, not for the value of the stock, but for the stock itself. So if you borrow one stock and then you sell that stock on the market and you make money. So you sell that stock that you borrowed to somebody on the market and you take cash and you put the cash into your bank account. So now you're holding cash that you made from the person that bought the stock and the debt of the actual stock item back to the broker. Then you hope the price of the stock goes down. So when you sold the stock on the market, let's say you sold it for $100, then the stock price goes down to $50. Then you buy the stock back from somebody on the market for $50 and then hand the stock back to the guy you borrowed it from. And in the process, you pocket the difference. So you made $100 when you sold it in the beginning. Then you bought another one for $50. You keep $50 and hand the original stock back to the broker. That's a short sale. The problem the thing that makes it one of the most risky ways of stock trading is that if you buy a stock to hold it and make profit by the stock value going up, the worst that can happen is that the stock will drop to a zero price. Like the company will go out of business.
Get to bankruptcy and then,
stock goes to zero. You lose whatever money you spent, you bought into the stock. That's the worst case scenario. When you're shorting stocks, there is no barrier. If you borrow the stock from a broker and you sell it on the market,
obligated to deliver the stock, not the money.
Yes. You sell the stock on the market, you get your $100, and then the stock goes to $1,000. When the borrower broker wants his stock back, you have to give it to him. In fact, it's called forced cover. Like they will cover your short forcibly. They will go on the market, buy their stock back to recompense themselves,
and you have to pay for it,
and hand you the bill for whatever it is. And like when a stock value goes down and you're buying long, the most you can lose is what you put in. When you're buying short,
you can always hold the stock or maybe write it out to bankruptcy and get some of the, when they divvy up the debt in the courts, maybe you get like some little couple tokens or whatever you hold stock, you get a little bit piece of what's left over here.
But there's no maximum stock price. Like a stock can go to $1 billion and you owe then $1 billion to the broker effectively to buy that stock back for him.
Yeah. So I'll put it as an analogy. Let's say somebody comes to you and says, I'd like to, you're like, someone's like, this person wants an apple. Someone's like, I'm looking to buy an apple. And you're like, well, I have an apple to sell you. And you go to your friend Bob and it's like, Bob's like, I'm holding these apples. I don't want to sell them. Well, can I borrow one? Okay, here's an apple. Yeah, you can borrow one. I want it back tomorrow. And so you go over there and you're like, here's this apple. And you make the money. You're like, aha, now I'll just buy an apple to replace Bob's apple tomorrow. And so then tomorrow comes and you're like, all right, I'm going to go buy an apple. And it's like, let's say you sold the apple for $1 and you go out and everyone's got apples for sale for $5. And Bob's like, where's my freaking apple?
I want my apple.
And you're like, I guess I'm going to have to buy one for $5.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to lose $4 on it. Now your hope is that you're going to buy it cheaper. Now it gets one layer deeper with these hedge funds because what makes the gaming stocks so darn entertaining and interesting is that I'm trying to remember which hedge fund it was. They bought here's the way stock shares work is that, a corporation issues a bunch of stock either at one time or sometimes over several years. They have different stock offerings. Most of that stock is not traded. Somebody buys it and holds it to sell later, right? They're trying to get dividends or to get some kind of value out of it. So there's a certain number of shares that are I think they use the term floating. They're out there in the market. People are buying and selling them. So they shorted more than 100% of those available. So let's say there's 1,000 shares on the market. They shorted something like 1,200, right? So they said, we're selling 1,200 shares.
Yeah.
There's not even 1,000 shares for them. There's not 1,200 shares for them to go buy tomorrow to cover it. Right. So why would they short that amount? And the short answer is because the stock price is mostly determined based on who's actually trading the stock. And it's like supply and demand. It meets up. So if you double the supply, what happens? The price goes down. So if you put enough money into a small a stock like GameStop where there's not a lot of shares being traded, you can force the price to go down. Not force, but the price will go down simply because you increase the supply of stock. So you increase the supply of stock, the price goes down, then you buy the stock after you've decreased, because you put out, let's say there's 1,000 traded shares, you put out 1,200 imaginary shares, you borrowed 1,200 shares and sold them. So you force the price to go down, and then you just buy them up later, and here's your 1,200 shares back, and you just pocket the difference. That's the way that these hedge funds do things, is that because they have so much money to work with, you can target a stock like GameStop that has a low stock price and make a tidy profit, because if you can buy it at $20 a share, I think $22 a share is something where it started, and then sell it even at like $18 a share, and you've done it for $1 billion. Wow, you've actually made a lot of money off of that. You've actually made over $100 million, even with all of the transactional fees or interest you might have to pay because you do have to pay interest on the stock that you borrow. You pay a fee for that. Turns out a bunch of autists on the autist is not even a word, but a bunch of people on the internet were like, hey, they're shorting this over 100%. What if we bought and hold the stock? Then they'll have to buy it at whatever price we set. So a bunch of individuals just collectively got together anarchistically and corner the market. What you call cornering the market means you can set whatever price you want because you control most of the shares. And the hedge funds are like, what? We're a $15 billion hedge fund. And we had to liquidate $15 billion to buy GameStop stock to give it to the other people who were just holding it. And we're like, sure, here's some GameStop stock. I don't know what we're going to do with it. And it's like, oh, cool. Thanks for giving it back to us. Now we can sell it for $800 a share or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah,
it's such a great story.
The linchpin is them overselling, shorting more stock, borrowing more stock than actually exists. The hedge funds, I mean, because what that means is that when their margins get called, it's called a margin call. You have a margin trading account that a lot of words here. Basically, if you start getting screwed on a short sale, then the broker can call your margin, which means he can force you to cover your shorts or to buy those stocks back. But what if you've somehow sold more stocks on the market than exist in your short sale?
You have to go. You have to go find the shares from somewhere,
but they don't exist, so you're stuck.
And
it's brilliant.
There's some examples from the past. I saw someone posting this on Twitter that the guy who owned Piggly Wiggly, apparently they were shorting his stock, and he decided he was going to corner the market and force them to pay more money. And they went and found the shares, presumably, from random people that weren't selling them on the market, like they weren't out on the exchange. They had to go make a whole bunch of phone calls to figure out where was holding stock to this Piggly Wiggly thing. Widows and orphans in Nebraska holding stock and not intending to sell it, or some random mutual fund. You have to go buy the stock from the mutual fund. It becomes a little bit difficult to buy shares of stock when they're not on the exchange to buy. Yeah. You have to go call people and try to figure out who actually has the shares.
Jim Jesus says, $1 super chat says, I only speedrun Desert Bus. Have you played Desert Bus? Have you heard of that game?
I have not played Desert Bus, no.
It was made by Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller fame. I think he had something to do with creating a video game called Desert Bus. All you do is drive a bus from one city to another. It's a real world 2-scale simulation of the distance between, I think, Las Vegas and something else. I forgot what it is, but it's like an 8-hour drive. And it's just an empty road through the desert, and you drive a bus for 8 hours of real game time to get from one city to the other. And some people like Jim here tend to do that on stream for some reason. He'll just drive a bus in a semi-straight line for 8 hours. Anyway, so
that could be challenging in its own way, but it's not particularly. I wish we could.
Weird. I wish we could apply your rubric for art review to that game.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason why his game theory video and this discussion on what actual rules are versus published rules versus enforced rules is because this is a good example. We have a lot of people out there that are saying that that the people on Reddit are somehow criminal for manipulating the stock market by locking up these hedge funds. Then you have the other side saying that these hedge fund managers are criminals in their own right, and the app that is blocking them from being able to sell, or to buy more, are criminal in some way. I would say that none of this is true. No one is behaving criminally, quote unquote criminally. They're all behaving according to the rules of all of their various agreements, both mostly both in the actual published rules and enforced rules, but also in the unpublished, unspoken rules. So like when the Redditors used the app, I forgot what the name of the app was, to buy
Robinhood, thank you. Robinhood was the big one.
To buy the stock, and the app banned them from buying anymore to stop that. That was in the user agreement. You agreed to those terms when you used that app. They're within their rights to do that to you. If you don't like it, use a different app or write your own app. The exchanges, people are saying short selling is like criminal. Some people are insinuating it's criminal.
I think it's interesting it'd be interesting to look at it from a moral perspective. I talked to some Thomists about it, and from St. Thomas Aquinas, it's like you're borrowing stock and then selling it. It's like I don't know where the moral line is there, because it's not like a usury thing. You're not usury in a technical sense is basically like charging more in interest than the thing is actually worth. And there's a couple other things with usury. Basically, charging interest on a personal loan when there's no physical property to recover, that's usury according to St. Thomas Aquinas. So like if I loan you $100 and then I demand interest on that $100, that would actually be, now you could pay interest on me, but I can't morally enforce you to pay interest when there's nothing attached to that. You can say, I'd like $100 to buy a game console, to buy the Super Nintendo, and then you don't pay me back the $100. You owe me the Super Nintendo because there's a physical thing. That's not usury if you don't pay the loan on a physical object. Anyway, so people say, well, is this usury because it's not a physical object? In fact, it's like imaginary stock. Like what's the moral question there? But I think you're right. There's no question they were operating within the rules of the game. There's nothing in the rules of the game that says somebody can't take a large sum of money and buy lots of stock with it, or short sell lots of stock with it, which is what they're intending to do.
Not only that, but
there's also no rule in the game that.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. So it's also part of how the markets work. So when a company chooses to apply to list their stock on a market, they are accepting the rules of that game. They are signing up to agree to step in that boxing ring to fight with their stock, with their value of their company. They are handing to a market to be used in those rules in that system. And so when it's used according to those rules, according to the thing that, like if the market had a rule that they enforced that did not allow short sales, then less people would probably use that market. One, because short selling is sort of beneficial in some ways and useful to a lot of investors.
It can clear out overvalued assets, which is a benefit. And someone wrote an article about this. It's really funny, the media response to this, because it's been so tone deaf and they don't really understand anything about what's motivating people or what's actually happening. They're like, short sellers are heroes. I'm like, well, let's not go crazy here. Short sellers are people borrowing stock. There's nothing heroic about that, is there? No, but they're clearing out overvalued assets, which is heroic.
Yeah,
I don't know. Heroic is like saving people from burning buildings.
no more heroic than buying stock. Like it's an amoral thing. There's no morality. They're participating in a system the way it was designed. Somebody in the comments said, Red Barchetta said, except it's the only game in town. That is the best criticism, and that is in large part to the government's involvement and sort of forced monopolization of certain markets. It's so heavily regulated that you and I couldn't go and start our own market easily right now, that let's say didn't allow naked short selling. Naked short selling is what we're talking about. When you short more stock, when you borrow more stock than actually exists. I think the government actually made that illegal, but it's so, this goes to what we're talking about with game theory, it's so not enforced or messily enforced that it still happens all the time.
This is one of the things with the Security Exchange Commission, the SEC, they will enforce their rules in such a haphazard way that you can't accurately guess what they're going to do in any given situation. They locked Martha Stewart up for having a conversation on a plane. If they're going to, but it's like, well, I guess I can't talk about my company at all. It's like, but then they don't lock other people up for like, hey, let's get a couple $1 billion together and destroy GameStop stock. Oh no! Save us!
Help!
President Biden, save us!
And there are manipulative, sort of malicious ways to use short sale. Like as a large fund with a lot of money, you could short a company's stock almost out of existence that severely impacts the sell price of the stock. But anyway, we're not a financial advice channel. I just wanted to point out the game theory
None of this is advice. None of this is advice.
Yes, this is not financial advice.
There's no advice.
I do not have the holy piece of parchment that gives me permission to give you advice on financial stuff. Another good video you put out recently was on, what did you call it? What was the name of the video? It was a great way of phrasing it. On credentialism. What was the name of it? Yeah,
credentialism. I don't remember what I called it, but yeah, credentialism. Are you giving out financial advice? You're not a certified financial planner. How could you tell people what? You can't tell them what. It's like you're like legally obligated to never give advice is basically what it comes down to, unless you have a degree to do it, and then you could be sued for bad advice, I think.
Yeah, I think you call it like the priestly class of credentialism or something like that.
Yeah, it's a new clericalism, just like the priestly caste of people with credentials. Oh, you have a PhD, you are a fine cleric, and I will listen to your expert words about this or that and the other. And I think the modern priestly caste of scientists, not real scientists, but academics, is really just, it's kind of a replacement of a theological priestly caste that you had in days of yore with the Catholic Church, only their realm of expertise is not your soul, but like everything. So we need to trust the scientists because they know what they're saying. It's like, well, if they really know what they're saying, can't they make an argument that would convince me as to that their position is right? To me, that's where it is. Like, no, it's so complicated. No one can understand it, but this special priest over here, he's the only one who can possibly understand the science involved. So we just have to trust him. Like, that's a rather bizarre, vector to take there.
Jim says the really shitty thing is that they short sell, then they get on TV and newspaper and say it's going to zero, and these networks spread doom so they can get the stonks low. That's why CNBC is mad. Yeah, there's a lot of collusion for sure.
I think collusion's the big thing. If we talk about what's actually wrong or, morally wrong about it, it's that it's really that you are going to do things that are, again, we're talking about like rule sets. You're going to do things that you're going to stick to a rule set that other people really can't play by. And when other people play by it, that's when we see the masks come off. When a bunch of Redditors decide to collectively take their little stimmy checks for their, we're not going to buy chicken tendies this week. We're going to take our stimmy checks and we're going to buy GameStop stock. So wait, you can't do that. You don't run a hedge fund. How could you organize this much money without a hedge fund manager? So I think the fallout, now I think what's really interesting is what the fallout is going to be from something like this. Because I could totally see rules being added to try to stop people from, collectively making a move, which is what happened. A bunch of people collectively decided to make a move together. Voluntarily, no having to buy a mutual fund to do it.
But that's what a mutual fund is. Yeah, exactly. It's people investing together collectively to have lower the risk.
Securitize a large. Yeah, it said people don't have $1 million for a highly diverse portfolio. They maybe have $1,000. So you just securitize the portfolio and say, here's $1,000 worth of the portfolio that you get to have. Well, they just did that without a bank. I'm okay with that.
So however they end up regulating it is going to be messy, inefficient, and will probably make everything worse. Just for the record, I'm predicting it now. Not that that's a difficult prediction to make.
Well, and I also have this other thing too, and maybe I should make a video on this. I think the reason most laws are ineffective is not just that government is itself ineffective and inefficient, but most laws are really there to punish enemies and reward friends, not really to do what they intend to do. I made this point with gun control. Gun control has never and will never move the needle on crime ever. And if you look at the way it's constructed, you'd have to be insane to think that laws are intended to do that, because what they're intended to do is to punish Republicans. They're intended to make it more annoying to buy guns, more expensive to buy them, more annoying and more expensive to transfer, more difficult to acquire ammunition, more difficult to store, more difficult to use. It's really just a way of creating like legal quagmires for a political enemy called Republicans, which is why no matter how much gun control we add, crime never seems to be affected by it. I don't think the laws are designed to affect crime. Even if you could affect crime by somehow instituting some kind of gun control, it's like, well, Japan has all this gun control. They have barely any crime. It's like they're a completely homogenous society of people. Don't compare them to us, man.
So
that's that where lies madness.
We are halfway through my notes on things I want to talk to you about. So
okay.
We are an hour and a half in now. If you have a stop coming up, you let me know, and I will wrap this up.
We could probably go a few more minutes.
Okay, all right. So let's do two more things because I'm just having a blast. Let's go to So I looked for something I could disagree with you on because I think this makes for better interviews. One of the things that you sent me on Twitter in a private message was, I think, early on, and let me pull it up here. It was something to the effect of, you are a socialist when it comes to your family. You remember that message?
Yeah.
Can you tell me what you mean by that? Because I'm pretty sure we disagree.
This is like expressing, the collective nature of things. Like socialism is... socialism as it actually happens is completely anti-normal collective. And what I mean by that is that, we pool our money that we make together, we stick it all together. And basically, I don't make as much money as my wife, but I receive basically the same amount of benefits that my wife receives, the same amount of loot. In essence, like we redistribute the income so that we both are receiving the same amount of benefits. It's not like she has this amount of money that she has and I have my pittance that I don't get to spend anything on, right? So we collectivize our assets and we use those for furthering the children. Then we have two little children who contribute nothing and yet consume everything. They are just complete parasites. They don't work. They get welfare, right? And so it's like a terrible broken welfare state at the level of the family, but it works because we're a family, and because we're a family, all of those social feedback mechanisms. I love my wife, so I don't act like a parasite because she makes more money than me. Our children are not capable of making money, so they're not parasites for not being able to do it. And we're also raising them with a direction in mind so that eventually they'll be able to have their own, all those sorts of things come into it. So if you were to look at it as it's like some emulation of the welfare state. Oh, it's so broken and terrible. But all of the social cohesiveness that makes the family work just dissipates any of the problems that you'd have with economic collectivism at the family level. So at the family level, we're economically collective. We're also socially collective. I make the rules and I enforce them upon my children, right? I'm the ruler of the house. It's like, and it's even worse. It's like, not only am I the ruler of the house, it's like, I don't even make all the money in the house, but I'm ruling the house and I'm telling the children what to do. The point is that these sorts of philosophies break down at different levels of organization. So socialism is horrific at the national level because nobody, again, I think it's why people in cities tend to be statists, is they don't know their neighbors. And so they want the state to be their family and neighbors. They want to replace they're married to the state. They want to replace this normal cohesiveness where, I care so deeply about my wife. Of course, I wouldn't just take her money and buy I don't buy too many Super Nintendo games, but like buy garbage or something with it and spend it frivolously, because there's a social connection there that mitigates a lot of those problems. When you get out to the national level and it just becomes command economy becomes a terrible idea. We have a command economy. Your job is to your chore is to sweep the floor. I'm telling you what to do, right? And on a big economy, you don't want to tell people what to do. You want them to figure out what they can do well and make money at, and then they can do that, and that provides for the economy, I guess, anarchistically. So the further away you get from the family, the more anarchistic it needs to be, until at the international level, it is anarchistic, and it needs to be. You do not want one nation having some sort of even a democratic say over another nations. That's why the EU just makes me feel icky, is that it's like you can't stick 40 cultures together and say we're going to democratize this. It's like, that is no. That's not going to work, and it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad for a lot of the people there.
Yeah, so for me, it doesn't sound like you were taking the socialism position that I am both glad and sad that you didn't take, because it would have made for a better debate. Oh. You're advocating for a more just normal sort of family structure, and that's totally understandable. I was thinking you meant something along the lines of collectively owning property in your house or something like that. I run my house, though, very differently from what you're describing it like. And when I say I run my house, that's actually a complete misnomer. My home is anarchy all the way down. It's what do they say? It's turtles all the way down. But no. So everyone in my house owns themselves. Everyone directs themselves. There is no shared property in my home. Everyone, like, I have a son and a daughter. They both have their own toys, their own property. I have my own property. My wife has her own property. And what I found is that giving somebody, we've never a day had to, get them to share or to figure out sharing or to know any of that, like most parents have to sort of like train their kids to share. When we sort of give our kids and back up our kids' private rights over their property and ultimate rights over their property, then they feel free to share, because they know that at any time they want to retrieve their property, they have sort of the sovereign right to do so. It makes them secure in their toys. Yeah, we have a lot of things that we view as like the family. This is like the family property. And with that, basically I say, this is the family's, and I get to determine how that happens, because you're a kid and you can't decide exactly how we need to do this property. But my kids also have their own separate things as well. And actually, I think that's a good benefit, is if a kid has things that are his, then he can say he feels confident in using that property with other people, because again, he can retrieve it anytime he wants. Mostly the things about sharing is, so like, let's say cousin Mason comes over and my son doesn't want to share his toy. He's like, I don't want Mason to play with this. He's like, well, do you like having Mason over? Yeah, I like having Mason over. Okay. Well, Mason would probably really enjoy coming over if he got to also play with your toys with you. Okay, well, that makes sense. We'll play with the toys together just today. And when you go over to Mason's house, you play with his toys together, don't you? Yeah. Okay, so why don't you both do the same thing? And when he comes over, you can play with, you can play with your toys and that sort of thing. So we do have toys that are theirs for sure. But there's a big bunch of toys like in the playroom that are just like, those are just the toys. So if you guys have to figure out how you're going to share on your own, and it's like the baby's knocking over this thing. Well, the baby doesn't know how to not knock over that thing. So what does that mean you need to do with that thing? What if I take it into my room to play with it? Well, is the baby going to follow you in there? I won't let her. So yes, you can take it in your room and go play with it in your room. And then the baby won't knock it over. So yeah, that's basically how it is. But of course, like, it's a family. So certain things are more collective. Like we make a meal that we all eat. It's not like well, that's not true. Sometimes we each make a separate meal, because I tend to get kind of hardcore on dieting. But we make a meal together. What kind of dieting do you do?
Collectively make a meal. I have a pretty standard bodybuilding diet. It's a high protein diet. I can go into like super specific things, but I don't do any kind of weird diet like I don't do keto or anything like that. I'm a super calorie tracker sometimes if I'm trying to cut, which I really need to start my diet for spring so I can get like super shredded for the summer. Then we have to post physique. because I think YouTube likes it when you post physique.
Mutant Bam Hammer says, take your wife's money, buy more silver. Yes. Okay, so the last thing I'd like to talk with you about, and then I'll let you go. I appreciate the time that you've given me today. I've very much enjoyed the conversation. The last thing I'd like to talk with you about is your new book, Prolific Creativity. What inspired it? Who is it for, and what does it teach?
Well, what inspired it was really my subscribers, my YouTube subscribers. And the reason it inspired me is that I did a lot of videos on how to write stories and some of the more technical things about like how to, here's some character archetypes that are used in stories and you can use them, how to use them, how to write plot structures. And what I figured out is lots of people were not, they weren't completing their goals, not because they lacked this technical knowledge, but because they really didn't have their creative process worked out. They didn't know how writing fit into their life. They didn't know how, say, practicing guitar fit into their life and where they were going with it and what they were doing with it. So I decided that really the reason I've been successful is I have okay work habits. They're good enough that I'm able to put out a lot of books. Some people have better work habits than me and are better at this than I am. But considering that I'm very busy, I'm a stay-at-home dad in addition to doing YouTube and writing books. And I just got a lot going on in my life. I cram in what I can, even though this is not like the top priority. My family is really my top priority. And this is, writing is a little bit lower priority. Well, how did I fit that in my life? I figured out how I manage my priorities, how I manage my time, and I decided to write a book about it. So I came up with, I originally started as a very small YouTube series, which no one watched, but I cared enough about the content, I decided it'd work better as a book. And so I came up with, I think there were nine keys, the keys to being prolific as a creative professional. And so those keys, I added the ninth one when I wrote the book, which is called Break the Rules. But, I had align your priorities for creative output, meaning know what's important in your life so that you are allotting the correct amount of time for you to work. Because a lot of times people are like, I don't have time to write. That's not, you have to think about where your priorities are. Is it a lower priority than going to the gym? For some people it is, in which case you're just not going to put out as many books. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means it's a lower priority. What most people have a problem with when it comes to priorities is they have a misalignment of their priorities in their life. They want to write or they want to be creative, but they are not making time for it. Instead, they feel bad because they maybe get home from work and they waste their time playing a video game or watching TV or doing something else. And then they're like, I don't have time to work. Well, you have to figure out what your priorities are and stack them in correctly. And then it'll happen. All you have to do is have even a small amount of time, 30 minutes a day, will start to yield really big returns over time. So if you can get out 500 words a day, which you could do in an hour or 30 minutes, depending on your experience as a writer and how well you've plotted out your book, that means you've definitely written one book within a year. And most people never write a book in their entire life because they're not consistent about actually working on it. They don't follow through. They don't just keep hammering away at the task until it's done. And that's really what you have to do. So you have to figure out your priorities and what really matters to you as a person and figure out how to let go of some things. I don't keep a perfectly clean house. There's dirty dishes in the sink in the kitchen. There's dusty floors and dusty shelves because I'm not taking time to clean my house all the time. It's just a lower priority than other things, than playing with my kids or writing books. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just where it is. And if you're a clean freak, you have to figure out something else it's going to give. Maybe it's like, I really don't need to go to all these tennis matches. If you always find out somebody's got something in their life that they just kind of do for fun and they could actually dial it back because they actually don't care that much about it. Like maybe they play too many video games. Maybe they play, they watch too much TV or something like that. And there's definitely places for that too. You have to spend time doing fun things, but maybe, you figure out the balance there. The other one was establish a creative process, which is know your daily routines, like what you do in what order to do that, and a bunch of ways that you can figure that out. Talk about practice zombies, which are people that get out their instrument to practice, but they don't really make any progress because they have no idea what their goal is for when they're sitting down to work. And establish effective goals, which means know what you can accomplish and how you're going to accomplish it. Growth mindset, which is knowing that you're going to be continuing to get better. In fact, the more you stick with your process, the better you'll get. Professional mindset is approaching writing or creativity like a professional, like it's something that you really mean to be good at and you intend to get paid for, is another good one. And the farmer mindset is really knowing how to do things when they need to get done and being able to put off immediate pleasures for things that need to get done. So a farmer, and I am kind of a farmer, you know, I got to prune my peach tree pretty soon here. If I don't prune it, then I basically have ruined my whole crop of peaches. So when it needs to be pruned, I have like a 1 or 2 week window. It has to be pruned.
Whether or not you're sick, whether or not you're tired, whether or not you're preoccupied, the peaches will.
Yeah, no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah, the peach tree must be trimmed. And there are going to be times where you have to put off and you have to grind and you have to have a couple sleepless nights to finish what has to be done tonight. But it'll be better on the other side. So you have to have that mindset. And then avoid perfectionism. This is a problem for me and for many other artists. You just don't feel confident about what you've done. You want to make it perfect. It's not going to be perfect. You have to let that go and just make it as good as you can in the time that you have. And if I was going to add anything more to that one, it would actually be about knowing how to fix your time and your scope. So anybody that's been involved in any kind of serious project management, especially with software, because this is a big problem in software. You have a bunch of features you want to put in your software, but you also need to put the software out for people to buy it. So you have to figure out what you're going to do. Are you going to make the most feature-rich software you can and just take a really long time to put it out? If so, how are you going to pay to keep the lights on during that time? Or are you going to put it out in 6 months with whatever features you can add in that time? So which path are you going to choose? If you want to do both, boy, you're going to have your work cut out for you. You better be really on top of your process because it's going to be hard to keep that. Feature creep is a big one for sure. Yeah, feature creep. Like look at, what is it, Star Citizen. I don't know if we'll ever see Star Citizen. But the more features you add, the more time it's going to take to get those features working. And it's the same thing with a book. The longer you make the book, the longer it's going to take. So you need to either fix the amount of time that you're going to work on it, or you need to fix how big the project is going to be. So for instance, I'm fixing time over the next month. So February, I'm going to work on music. I'm going to do as much music as I can in the month of February. You know, if I tried to fix both, I'm like, I'm going to do 10 songs in February. I better really know what I'm doing, and I better be willing to have a couple of really long days to get that done, because otherwise it's not going to happen. Rather, I'm going to work as much as I can in February, and whatever I get done is what I get done in February, and hopefully it's enough for like a new album release. And I'm really excited to do that. If you're going to fix both, you have to be really, really on top of your scheduling. And most people can't do it. Even really experienced, say, contractors, you know, there's certain things that have to be done in a remodel project, and sometimes the project goes long. It takes longer than the allotted time to do it, and homeowners get very frustrated because it takes an extra week to get the renovation done. It's like you run into little problems that you don't foresee. There's always little things that come up that delay you, no matter how good your planning is. You just accept it and know that that's what's going to happen. So when you're writing a book, know that you might get interrupted, might get sick. You might, the family member might get sick. Your dog might die, and you're not going to be able to work for a couple of days. And that's okay. It just takes that much extra time to finish. As long as you continue to stick to the process, eventually it will get done. Problem is when you're like, I need to get it done in 1 month and it needs to be exactly this long, it's going to be tough. Mm-hmm. So I recommend that you fix one or the other. Get your process down so you're working 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, and however long it takes to finish, that's what it takes to finish. And then, or say, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day and have that be that. And don't fix the time. If it takes me 3 hours to write 1,000 words, if it takes me 30 minutes to write 1,000 words, I'm writing 1,000 words a day.
The consistency is the key, I think, rather than...
Yes. Consistency is absolutely.
Yeah.
So the better you are at managing your work habits, the more productive you will be. So it's like anything else.
Bridge the gap for me. So I'm a software engineering mindset. Very much not a artistic, creative type person. My superpower is to sort of airdrop into hyper complicated problems with lots of moving parts, assemble them all into a solution that works, and get that done quickly. That's what I enjoy doing. However, I've done a lot of work over the past several years on concepts like what are rights and who gets them, natural rights versus deontological, all the different conceptions. And at this point, I've made a lot of YouTube content on it. I've even written a few little short articles on our website about it. But it's feeling like it needs to be a book. Like that's the proper format for a large, deep topic like this. I have never written anything like that. It's intimidating to me. I don't even know where to start. I don't know how. Can you? You've done entire series on your YouTube channel walking people through step by step by step how to write things like fiction novels. Can you give me some advice for a brain like mine on how to do something like this?
I'll tell you how basically I wrote this is if you look at the table of contents, it's basically a big outline. Well, you can't see it because my lights are too bright, but it's basically a big, it's a big outline. So I just I outlined it. I just wrote down, okay, first chapter, I'm going to talk about this. And then I just wrote down the big topics. And then it's like fill in the blanks. Oh, I'm writing this today. And I just wrote through all of the topics I'd written down until I finished it. And along the way, if I came up with, I should really stop talking about this, I just went ahead and put that in. I didn't make myself stick to the outline I came up with on the first day or two that I was thinking about the book. I was flexible with that. So if I felt like I needed to add something in or change something, I just went ahead and did that because I can do that. But having that outline in mind, because I hadn't really written nonfiction, I'd written lots of nonfiction articles, but not like a book. So that really helped me to just organize my ideas. So my ideas, the bigger ideas were organized on the first day. And then after that, it was just executing the writing. And because I knew the topics really well, it was really easy to write it. You just write until it's done. So for you, because these are topics that you really know, you kind of have to start by bounding in what the book is about. Kind of got to think, okay, some of these things I want to write a book. And I think a really good place to look is actually look out at what is missing from the market. What are people not really talking about? What are they not really putting out in a book? What's the missing conversation? And have I talked about it? And is that something that I can start with? And then, of course, you may support that with other things that are previously established, whatever it's going to be. So if you're going to write a book on, I don't know what your book would be on, but let's just say that it's like social organization without a state or something, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's something that kind of like piques your mind. Okay, well, no, people aren't really right. Who's written books that are similar, and where's my gap, and what is unique that I can talk about? And then from there, you can just organize what's the bigger ideas, and then what are all the smaller ideas, and write down an outline. Then it's kind of fill in the blanks as you go. Like, okay, first thing I have to establish and talk about is this. Or first thing I have to talk about is an introduction where I talk about the big idea. It's like, what if I told you that you actually don't need an authority to tell you how to live your life, or whatever it's going to be, whatever your intro is going to be, that is a challenging idea, and then go from there. So I think writing nonfiction, it's kind of like, you guys remember writing 5-paragraph essays. 5-paragraph essays were kind of stupid, but they're correct in one big thing, is that when you're writing nonfiction, you want to just start with a big idea, a thesis that makes people interested to know how you're going to explain it, and then go into specifics after that. So you can kind of think of a book as that on steroids. What's the big idea? Here's the statement of the thesis. Here's all the specifics beyond that. And so you just, the chapters are where you're getting really specific about how things work.
I tend to get hung up on the broad strokes. Like, I will not begin writing or working on a project until I have the title perfect, or until I have the logo perfectly designed. But before I even begin working on the website itself, I'll want these.
I know authors that start with the cover.
Really?
That's just kind of, it depends on how your mind, and everybody's mind works a little bit differently. I usually don't come up with the title till the very end.
Really?
And I usually don't have a title for a book until I'm forced to commit to one. I'm very non-committal on titles. Huh. And so, a lot of titles I come up with at like the last minute. Other titles are thought up like halfway through the book. It's pretty rare that I start with the title and then I write a book. Almost never that works that way. Eyes in the Walls, I just came up with, I'm like, what am I going to call this stupid book? I'm like, let's call it Eyes in the Walls. It sounds creepy. I was like, I have to publish this book this week. I got to come up with a title. So I just came up with the title and designed a cover real quick and put it out, and people loved it. Like, what a great what a great title for this. I'm like, I don't know, made it sound, I was like, The Hills Have Eyes, but I can't call it that. Eyes on the Walls. Let's do that.
So the brief rundown of what you would suggest that I do is like set a deadline for myself on when to be done with the project. How would you say I get started?
Well, I would actually say, I mean, you like to start with title. So think of the title that expresses, I would start with market research to see what's missing from your area that you're talking about. That's a really good way to begin, I think, with nonfiction. And that's something that I wanted with this is there's very few books on the practical nature of being a creative professional in the world. Everything is like mindset, how to think positively, or it's like, here's how you plot a book. And I didn't want to do either one of those. But not a lot of books on how to develop your good work habits as a writer, let's say. So I would probably start with the big idea, and maybe that's a title, and then just allot some time every day that you're going to work on. And don't worry about, because this may be a long-term project, don't worry about, I have to write 1,000 words a day. Just start with, I'm going to work for an hour a day. I'm going to focus for 30 minutes a day at this. I'm going to do 30 minutes of focused work and see what I can get done. And I think it'll come more clear in your mind as you start to get working and trying to outline. I think outlining the ideas that you want to talk about is probably a better approach to nonfiction, because and then you may revise the outline as you're working, and that's okay too. You get to change whatever you want as you go. It just depends on how your mind works. Do you work from big ideas to small, or you work from small ideas to big? I tend to actually work from small ideas to big. I'm kind of realizing this with myself. When I write a story, I tend to just start with the first scene and nothing else in mind. And then I start to outline everything else from that. So I start with the micro. Who's this character? What's he look like? What's he doing? And then kind of goes out from there. And then I can outline a whole story and then write the book. Other people have a big idea. Like I'm imagining a hero and a villain, and I'm imagining something that's like the Battle of Troy, but like, they come up with big ideas, high concepts. I kind of work in reverse. So you have to know thyself. You have to know where you are. Do you start with the little concepts, or do you start with the big concepts? You start with the little concepts, you put those ones, I feel like these are related. Now what expresses their relationship for this book? And that's the title, and that's the big idea. And then you just write until it's done. And maybe it takes a month, and maybe it takes longer than that. Maybe it takes 6 months, maybe it takes a year. As long as you're working on it consistently, you'll probably get there. And as long as you avoid perfectionism where you're like, man, it's just not good enough, I need to go back and rip this out. You should have one good revision process to it. You should finish your draft, then do your revision process. Make it as good as you can, but don't spend a whole lot of time revising and rewriting and hoping that you can, write the book 6 times to make it good. Do one good revision, then start working on publishing it.
That's also the fear, especially in the subject matter. Like if you're working in moral philosophy, there's always a chance that there's something out there you haven't heard of that defeats all of your arguments. Yeah. And it's like, when is it ready to publish? When am I sure that nobody else out there in the world has not, disproven this?
This is the problem with reading philosophy too, especially as time goes on, is that philosophical works start to become denser and denser because you start to operate with other thinkers that came before you. And to the point where, like, by the time you get into the 19th century, so much of a philosophy book is references to other philosophy and responses to other philosophy. It's hard to know. It's hard to well, what's the core idea here? It's kind of why I like Nietzsche's. He just kind of, I don't know, he just attacks his idea, and it's just his idea exploding for a whole book. It's just so compelling to read compared to, I don't know, even something like Kant. Kant is so dense to try to read, to sift through, to go like, what's the big idea here? Oh, the big idea here is like we should all operate, as if everything we do is a universal law. Okay. Here's the thesis. Here's 1,500 pages.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. Yep. All right.
I'd say, yeah, it's a toughie. So you're probably not going to cover every base. And if somebody says, hey, here's this argument that's there, it's like, I hadn't considered that. Maybe I'll put that in the follow-up book, or maybe I'll do a revision that acknowledges those. You can always revise. Lots of guys come up with revised editions that have addendums onto the chapters. It's like, this thing has happened since I published it, which we have to talk about because it's part of the subject of the book. And that's okay too.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, sir, I have really enjoyed this time. Thank you so much for joining me.
I have too. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you've enjoyed it, because I want to invite you back for the rest of my list.
Sure.
But
you find more at dvspress.com. That's my main website that's got articles and stuff. And you can get this. I think it's $2.99 for the ebook for this one. And newest fiction book is technically this Christmas collection. Oh my gosh. That came out for Krampus Christmas 2020. It's an anthology of fright and melancholy to celebrate the year 2020. I don't know what 2021 is going to be. It's going to be like Mayhem 2021. Mayhem Christmas. So this one's got a bunch of books that I've already published, and then it has some brand new stuff. It's got a new short book called The Wasting Desert that takes place in my fantasy universe. So it's fantasy horror, if you like fantasy horror, and a bunch of other stuff. There's horror books in here, melancholy stuff on Gen Y being Gen Y, and all kinds of stuff that is fun. The entirety of Muramasa Blood Drinker is in here. So if you like samurai novels, the whole book is in there. So that one is $20.20 for the paperback. If you want the paperback, should be available for a little while still, and then I'm gonna take it down because it should be a limited time only thing.
So there is a long ass list of links in the description of this video with all of his websites, all of the videos that I referenced that he's done that I really enjoyed. There's a link to the movie reviews playlist that he has on his channel. To his scoring system, the dangers of social media video, which I really think every single person that uses social media should be aware of. I know I've talked about it on this channel several times. Guys, please definitely go check out David's work. And yeah, I hope to have him back on in the future. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you next time.